There any questions from members of the panel? If not,
Sir.
We've been asking people who come up and testify what it is they would recommend that we might do as a legislature to make a difference. So, for example, we had academics here earlier. What kind of data do we need to determine the degree to which there is racial profiling? We're sure it exists. We want to see where. We want to see what we can do about it. That requires data, seeing what happens, in part so we can really show people that it is happening. And one of the things they brought up was that many more stops have made of men of color than white men, and that in general there are fewer incidents, fewer breaking of the law, fewer things that you would report from those stops of men of color than there are on white men. So pure, good evidence that people are just more suspicious. And we want more evidence of that. We want to get evidence on when there is use of force, all the circumstances surrounding it. There were also suggestions from a judge this morning on how to reform the process, talking about independent prosecutors. A wide variety of different things that we might do. Do you have anything that you think we as a legislature could be doing to help the community and the police department grow together and help the police department do its job better and the community to work better with law enforcement?
Well, as I stated, I'm not a professor and not a legislator. My knowledge is more on the ground level. So I have recommendations for actions that could take place between law enforcement and the community. Like, for one, the community can know who the cops are on a personal level. Every week, I'm in someone's classroom, elementary, junior high, high school, and it's not just me, I have partners too. And if we can't fit it in on our days that work, then we come on our off days, because we know that we're going to speak to that classroom full of 30 kids and we will see them again later on that week. We will see them next week. And just knowing them and having them know us, they're more likely to tell us that a crime is going to happen. I wish I had the data on the crimes that we've stopped from happening because kids or members of the community told us what was going to happen. So I look at that as a way to fight crime, just knowing them. We have a program where we just speak to youth once a week at least. And in the first program, there were 25 of them, and I asked them to all raise their hand. How many of you know a cop personally? And 2 raised their hands. And when I questioned further, one knew a dispatcher and the other knew a probation officer. None of them knew a cop. To them, cops were stormtroopers that came into their community and arrested someone and dragged them off. But at the end of that session, 25 of them knew one. And so the more we make that happen, the more we can become human to them and they can become human to us. So I apologize, but I only have advice on my level.
You are giving us information from the ground, and we have heard this also from some of the academics earlier, that getting out to the community is extremely important. It means a lot to me to hear that from you. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
yeah.
And thank you for your testimony. My question is just a little bit different. You're an African-American male who's within the system that's dealing with your colleagues, your law enforcement officers. And I know there's a code of silence, and I know there's this thing where you don't basically rat out another fellow officer. How do you handle it when you know some of your fellow officers aren't behaving appropriately? You know, inside of your heart, you need to say something, you need to do something to stop that behavior, because with 1 or 2 of you do something wrong, you're all painted with the same brush. Heaven knows any elected official will tell you that, what that feels like. But how do you handle that so that this distrust, or even the road cops that are doing things that are either illegal or brutalizing the community, you know it, you know who they are. How do you personally handle that?
So once again, my experience in law enforcement is going to be a little different. Going into the academy, everyone knew why I was there, and they knew I had a degree in Black Studies, and I had a band that was very vocal about justice and equality. Going from there, I wrote a play called Cops and Robbers that centers on an officer-involved shooting, and it talks about racism and injustice, and it's very critical on all sides. So, and I only have 4 years on. So that said, in that time, if there were rogue cops or cops that were heavy-handed or would do a little too much, if they do exist on my shift, they were careful to not do anything like that around me.
It might be why we need more like you on the force.
Maybe. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, I wondered if you had concrete recommendations about what we should be trying to incentivize in our budget considerations to build more positive partnerships between law enforcement and the community, and also ways of having the culture of law enforcement also embrace diversity and deal with some of the issues that we may all have to deal with of perhaps not explicit racism, but unconscious bias, et cetera.
Many incentives come from the top down, and others you just find very passionate people on the bottom to do the work. There are different community-based organizations that have expertise in certain areas, and they're kind of living grant to grant. But then you have law enforcement, that's this system with funding and political leverage, building bridges between the community-based organizations and law enforcement. That would take some serious planning from the top, but at the bottom it's just going to take a lot of people rolling up their sleeves. For instance, we're working now in my unit to transform the jail into more of a reentry based place. So as soon as they come into the jail, they're being prepared to go back out into the streets, prepared properly. And that takes therapists, that takes volunteers. It just takes a different way of thinking, ultimately. And that's gonna take some funding as well. So again, I can't answer that question completely. You would probably have to sit down with my lieutenant, who does a lot of structuring and fights all of those fights in the meetings while I'm out on the concrete.
Right. Your lieutenant is here today, too. We're happy to have him here. We've been, okay, are there any other questions?
I have a comment. First of
Okay.
all, let me commend you and thank you for coming here and representing the uniform in a way that I think is way more representative than what has been in the media as of late. Your attitude is reflective of a number of people, but you have a gift that some officers don't have, the identity gift. You can reach out to the community in a more effective, more receptive way than many other officers can. And this, the code of silence perception, I'm not saying that it doesn't completely exist, but it is far better than it used to be, and we need to continue to totally eradicate it to the point to where it doesn't exist. And you are to be commended, and your points are very well articulated. You may be on the front lines, but you speak with great leadership and in a way that it resonates with those of us who up here who are policymakers. And please continue the pathway that you've began, and continue to reach out and influence the people that will listen to you, because that gives us great optimism. As legislators, we can't have the same influence that you can have. And we do our best, and we rely on good people like yourselves. So thank you for having the courage to wear the badge in a way that the public will have the trust that we need to have the partnership that we deserve.
Thank you, sir.
Well, thank you. On that note, thank you very much.
Thank you.
For your testimony. We'll move on to actually more representatives of law enforcement. If the panel would come forward, Sheriff Christensen, the Sheriff of Stanislaus County and the President of the Sheriff's Association in California, Alwyn Brown, the Deputy Police Chief in Richmond, California, and Philip and Amada Tingrides from the Los Angeles Police Department. I didn't pronounce the name right, I can tell. Oh, okay, I did it. Okay. Okay. And I understand that there's a couple of other people here from LAPD, but you're here to answer questions that the panel may have. Right. So, promising practices, unresolved challenges. Sheriff Christensen, welcome to the committee. Thank you so much for making the time.
My pleasure, Senator. Thank you for having us. Oh, you're going to let me go first? Wow.
Well,
Okay.
you're first.
I was going to let my colleagues go first.
Well,
First of all, thank you for having us. I think it's critically important that these types of discussions and debates occur because it brings greater understanding, fostering of what we're already doing in our communities. And I think that you'll hear today from certainly myself and our colleagues about the kind of work that we are doing in the community. And I think it's critically important that we understand that our partnerships and our relationships in the community are absolutely essential and critical to our success in public safety. We alone will not be able to successfully police or keep our communities safe without the community's support and help. I would suggest that, at least in Stanislaus County, I'm grateful and humbled to enjoy widespread community support. That's largely due to those partnerships. And that's the culture of the organization. And that's really where it starts, is ethical leadership. And there's a couple of points I want to make with respect to where do we start? You know, is the system really broken? Is it something we need to fix? Or is it just law enforcement's obligation to better communicate what it is we're trying to accomplish? And certainly on the front end of what we do are those very important things called hiring standards. And our hiring standards are as high as they are for the singular reason of protecting the public's trust and confidence in us. I need young people who can serve their community, who are accountable, responsible, dependable. They understand how important the law enforcement code of ethics is. To my staff and the culture we create, if you can't abide by the law enforcement code of ethics, reevaluate your employment options. So there are things that we can do collectively together, not only in our hiring practices and the promotion of ethical leadership, of the culture of the organization, which has to be one that's based on service to the community. We know that. Our work with community-based organizations, our work with service, civic, charitable, faith-based business, education, agriculture, the state legislature, all very, very important. Because again, without those relationships, we won't be successful. And I think that in itself is what makes us in Stanislaus County very successful. But it's also the commitment that I've made as the sheriff to be actively engaged, visible, be accessible to the community. So for example, I have a lot of great relationships with the faith-based community. The president of the local chapter of the NAACP has my cell phone number. We go to lunch. We talk about how we can do a better job of engaging in our communities, how we engage young people. We put tremendous effort and time into early intervention, prevention, and education. But unfortunately, ladies and gentlemen, I can't terminate or indict an employee because they don't care about their community. We can certainly hold them accountable, and we do, but it really starts with the culture of ethical leadership, of character and competence, and identifying members of the community who want to serve their community as young people, but who also want to abide by our standards. And to that, I would offer up my colleagues here at the table. I think they'll tell you the same thing, is that we are engaged in young people in the community. We have police activities league programs. I have deputy sheriffs who roll up in the car and throw it in park and get out and shoot hoops with the kids at the local park, because that's what I expect. So really it starts with all of us as leaders in the community and the expectation from the sheriffs and the chiefs to command staff to frontline supervision to the police officers and deputy sheriffs to accept that commitment that will not only abide by the law enforcement code of ethics, but that we will partner with the community. And when we make a mistake, and I've said very publicly before to the community, if we make a mistake, I'll be the first guy to get out in front of it, to admit to the mistake, to take corrective action, and to hold accountable those employees who have failed to meet my expectations. And I have terminated law enforcement officers for failing to meet the expectation and violating the public's trust and confidence in us. Thank you.
Thank you. Alwyn Brown, welcome. Thank you for coming.
Well, good afternoon. Thank you for having me. It is a sincere pleasure to be here. Just to take a few minutes to talk about policing in Richmond. So Richmond, by way of introduction, is East Bay City, a couple miles north of Oakland and Berkeley, population of about 110,000. Pretty diverse population in Richmond. Our police force is 300 employees, about 200 sworn and 100 professional employees. Richmond is a place that is not a stranger to violent crime, in particular gun violence, in years past. And I say that proudly, in years past. It's been ranked among one of the most dangerous cities in the United States of America.
Could you move the mic just a little bit closer? Yes, thank you very much. Brown.
And so the policing system that we put together is founded on the basic principles of community policing. So community policing generally and across the board has three main components: community engagement, problem solving, and organizational transformation. And I would like to say that we are continuing to tinker with the mix and how those things work. And we've feel like, at least on the crime front, we've made some pretty dramatic progress. We're able to report, as of 2014, our Part 1 crimes were down 14%. They've been down every year for the last 6 years. But for the first time in 2014, the number of property crimes in our city was below 1,000. That was the first time that happened in 20 years. And the number of violent crimes was under 1,000, the first time in 20 years. So those are pretty significant milestones for us. So our system is based on community partnerships, engagement, a geographic system that breaks the city into 3 distinct geographical areas. A captain has responsibility for each one in terms of formulating strategies to deal with crime, but to also be the leader on community engagement strategies. Those 3 captains have mixed responsibilities because each one also commands one of our specialized investigative divisions, so that sort of facilitates the internal cross-function cooperation that's needed. We have a philosophy of keeping the same officers on the same beats, working the same neighborhoods for longer periods of time, so that they get to know the nature, the character of the neighborhoods. They get to understand what the problems are, not just in terms of people and crime, but also in terms of the aesthetics. Our department is put together a little bit differently in that we have an entire division, code enforcement, that works out of our building. It's part of the police department, because we understand the connection and the correlation between physical environments and crime. And so when officers are dealing with problems based on community priorities, they're able to not just address the people part of it, but also some of the environmental factors such as graffiti and blight and things of that nature. And so we also have a presence on the internet. Social media is part of how we connect to multiple segments of the community. Every police officer has a voicemail account, email account. No police officer in Richmond is anonymous. It's easy to figure out who there are. We take great pride in community members knowing the names of the beat officers assigned to their neighborhoods. We also push information out through Facebook. Obviously, we have a website, and we communicate messages out over our Twitter account. So we feel like That mix has helped us along. We obviously have pretty strong relationships with community. One of the more difficult ones to build, took several years, but it's running pretty good now, is our Project Ceasefire program, Lifelines to Healing. And the hard component of that was putting together a pretty cohesive working group. But over time, that working group has evolved to a place where if we have, a violent incident, obviously we push information out to the working group right away, and they immediately start to contact folks who may be connected to or involved with the young folks involved with the gun violence. And that is, helps in terms of a deterrent. The faith-based community aspect of that program does weekly night walks, Friday nights, through some of the most troubled neighborhoods in Richmond, just spreading a positive message and to get young people who might be idle or otherwise not engaged in something positive, to get them turned toward either services that can help them or just to, live their life in different ways. And so we do have multiple connections to different segments of our community. And we continue to push, the messages of people getting involved, reporting suspicious activity to the police, neighbors looking out for neighbors and helping each other. We have about 35 organized neighborhood council groups and about 200 active neighborhood block watches. So beat officers interact directly at the neighborhood level through these formalized meetings, but also, we encourage them to get out of the cars, to make contact in self-directed time. Not necessarily to enforce the law, but just to be out, to be seen, and to engage the public. So we feel like, and I can just report to you from a personal standpoint as a 30-year police officer in Richmond, the relationship between police and community is dramatically different and much, much better today, even though we still have a few more things that we want to do, and it's still work in progress. I mean, it really is endless work. So. We try to learn from our mistakes and build on our successes.
Thank you. I don't know, how do you pronounce your name, number one, and either one of you can go first.
It's Phil Tingerides, and I'd like to go first and kind of lay a foundation of what we did to get to a point where we could start the program, Community Safety Partnership, that Sergeant Tingerides oversees. So first, thank you so much for having us up here. In 2007, I was assigned to Southeast Community Police Station as the commanding officer. And when I got to Southeast, it was a place that was, it included the Watts community. And it was a place that had seen tremendous violence over the years. And it was so much violence consistently that everybody was numb. The cops were numb, the community was numb. And quite frankly, nobody was doing it right. The police department wasn't doing it right because we were going in and just making arrests and not having any sympathy, any compassion for what was happening in that community. And the community was numb. They had a lot of untreated trauma, and nobody was taking responsibility for what was going on in their community. And so one of the first things that I tried to do when I got there was start to build some relationships. I believe very strongly in relationship-based policing. I think it's different than community-based policing. I don't think you can do community policing without a relationship. And so first you have to have that relationship. And quite frankly, a lot of the adults didn't want to have a relationship with us because we were the oppressors. We were people that just came in the middle of the night and pulled somebody out of the house and arrested them. So we started working in the schools. We started working in the schools, going in and reading with kids, primarily in the Watts community, and it wasn't just the community relations people, it wasn't just the supervisors, it was all officers, so that the officers could see kids in a different light. They were used to going to a call and seeing people at their worst, but in schools you could see kids as they were, and the day I went in, I looked down and saw a kid that just looked like the 6 of our kids, no different. So it was a very different dynamic to build that relationship. And the first time we walked onto that school playground, kids literally ran away screaming, they're here to arrest us. Over time, as we continued to push that and doing it every single week, the kids started running towards us, and they started seeing the officers very, very differently. In in the meantime, we had a grassroots meeting that took place for 2 hours every Monday at the Watts Civic Center, called the Watts Gang Task Force. It was a group of community leaders, gang interventionists, police officers, community service organizations, HACLA, elected officials who all came together for 2 hours every Monday. And that was used as a platform to tear down the hurt, to get out the hurt that had occurred over years and years and years. And quite frankly, for the first 3 years that I went to that every Monday, I got my butt kicked because there was a lot of hurt. And it was important for me to own it, even though I may not have been there, I may not have been the one. I'm wearing the uniform that represents the one. And so over time, the dynamics really started to change. That trust started to be built. And more people started coming in because people heard what was going on. And quite frankly, there was a lot of people shocked that LAPD was, one, going to a movie or a meeting every week, but secondly, we were listening, we were apologizing. And as that dynamic started to change, then it was time to hold the community responsible. And this gave us, for about 3.5, 4 years, an opportunity to build a foundation to then implement the Community Safety Partnership Program that Amada is overseeing, and I'll let her talk about that specifically.
Good afternoon. The Community Safety Partnership Program is actually the brainchild of civil rights attorney Connie Rice. And it was her vision to have dedicated police resources in the public housing developments, specifically in the community of Watts. So right now we have officers assigned to Nickerson Gardens, which is the largest public housing development west of the Mississippi. It has 1,057 units in it. And within each unit, you have a minimum of 2 to 3 people. So just in that one community, there's well over 3,100 people residing in that one public housing development. We also have officers assigned to Ramona Gardens, which is in East Los Angeles or Boyle Heights area. And when Connie Rice went to our chief of police, Chief Charlie Beck, and the CEO of the Housing Authority, she had stated that she wanted this program to be something different. And she wanted to ensure that officers who were going to be assigned to this program understood the concept of relationship-based policing. And Watts was the best community to start this program because of the prior work that we had done, and the community was ready. For the first time, LAPD said, we're not going to tell you how we police your community. We're going to let you tell us how you want us to police your community. And we're going to be transparent. We're going to police constitutionally. And we're going to try to work together to build a relationship with the community that at one time we have to send a minimum of 4 police officers into the public housing developments because we were either getting rocks and bottles thrown at our police cars or we were on a skirmish line. So the premise of the program, we have officers assigned to each of the developments. We have 10 officers and a supervisor, and their primary mission and function is to build relationships with the folks that are living in the public housing developments, which are the lowest socioeconomic communities in the nation. And the officers set out to do that. The officers that were selected to be in this program were interviewed. They showed an interest in doing this program. And we selected officers that had the ability to display passion and compassion and understanding for the community. Part of relationship-based policing is the officer understanding the culture of the community that they're policing. Because if we understand the culture of the community, we're going to know that we're dealing with a lot of children that have untreated trauma, who've seen their dads and their brothers and their cousins die on the street, and those social and mental ills have not been worked through. They haven't received the counseling, and then they've seen law enforcement react to the community in a negative way. Those are the communities that we're policing. So I need to understand that when I come into a community and begin to bridge this gap between law enforcement and the communities that we're serving. And our officers have been able to do that. We're providing safe passages to ensure that the kids get back and forth to school safely. And once school started, our officers are on campus working with the guidance counselors, working with the students. We've partnered with a lot of nonprofit organizations. We've partnered with Children's Institute because what we've learned is there is a lot of untreated trauma in the community, and families need a link to get to the resources. We have a large Latino population in South Los Angeles right now. And a lot of those residents are afraid to receive services or don't understand or the protocol on how to receive those services. So the officers have been a link between the community and the nonprofits and other social services that are in our communities. We've implemented several youth programs. We have our very own built from the ground up Watts Bears football program, where we took kids from 3 public housing developments that at one time were fighting with each other and shooting each other, and one kid knew that the other kid's brother had killed his brother, and now they're playing on one team called the Watts Bears. And it's not about what housing development you live in and what community you live in. It's about the team concept. And they're being coached by police officers. So the police officers are humanizing the youth that live in the community. And one thing that's really important about this program is the fact that it's changing how law enforcement polices the community. And the community is changing how law enforcement views the community. And I could talk so much longer, but I know I have a time thing, so.
Yeah, and just to really close this, building relationships, building trust,